Hareini mekabel alai mitzvat habore ve'afta l'reach kamocha reacha kamocha Hareini mekabel alai mitzvat habore ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha reacha kamocha. And with that reminder of our commitment to love our neighbors as ourselves, we'll begin on page 103, Birchot HaShachar and Psukei Zimra.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan latzach v'bina le'avchin ben yom u'ben layla.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani b'tzalmo.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani ben chorin.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani Yisroel.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, pokeach ivrim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish harumim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, zokev kefufim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, roch haaretz al hamayim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechin mitzadei gaver.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asa li kol tzorki.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael bigvura.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael b'tifara.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, anoten le'aev koach.
Amen.
Utnenu hayom v'chol yom lachenu l'chesed u'l'rachamim be'enecha u've'enech oroenu v'tigmalenu chasadim tovim. Baruch atah Adonai gomel chasadim tovim le'amo Yisroel.
Amen. We're on page 105.
Page 106. Ashreinu she'anachnu mashkimim u'ma'arivim erev avoker ve'omim pa'amayim bechol yom Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Kadesh et shikpa al maktishe shemecha v'kadesh et shikpa be'olamecha u'v'tzuachat harim v'tagbir karnenu Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh et shimcha barabim.
Amen. And on page 120, Psalm 30.
Mizmor shir Chanukat habayit leDavid. Ufachtem es v'del mecholi, pitachtes akivet ezra nisimcha, leman yuzamer chachavod v'lo yidom Adonai Elohai leolam odecha.
And on page 121, I invite anyone in a time of mourning or observing a yahrzeit to rise and join us in the mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba, bi'alma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kariv imaru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach Leolam Ulamei Almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitchomam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev yitalal shemei dikudashah b'reichu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiram b'yalma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Ho say shalom b'romav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. And on page 122 we begin Psukei Zimra.
Baruch Shem Arvei Haolam, Baruch Hu, Baruch Ozer Bereshit, Baruch Omer Ve'Yoseh, Baruch Ozer Mekayim, Baruch Merachem al Haaretz, Baruch Merachem al Habriot, Baruch Meshalem Sachar Tov Lireyav, Baruch Chaylead V'Kayam Lanetzach, Baruch Podei Umatzil, Baruch Shemo. Yachid Cheolamim, Melech Meshubach U'Mefuar, Adei Ad Shemo HaGadol, Baruch Atah Adonai, Melech Mehulal Batishbachot.
And on page 136.
Ashrei Yosef Beitecha, Od Yehelu Chasela. Tehila Adonai, Yedaber Pi, Vivarech Kol Basar, Shem Kachol Elam Voed, V'anachnu Nevarech Yah, Me'at Havi Ad Olam. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
On page 141, Psalm 150.
Hallelujah, 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 El Bekadsho, hallelujah, hallelujah, Birkia Uzo, hallelujah, 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 Vigevurotav, hallelujah, hallelujah, Rov, good Lord. Hallelujah, 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 B'tei shofar, hallelujah, hallelujah, B'nevel v'chinor, hallelujah, 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 B'tov u'machol, hallelujah, hallelujah, b'minim ve'ugav. Hallelujah, 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 b'tziltzilei shama. Hallelujah, hallelujah, b'tziltzilei truah. Kol hanshamati hallelujah, kol hanshamati hallelujah, kol hanshamati hallelujah, hallelujah, kol hanshamati hallelujah, hallelujah. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen. Baruch Shem kevodo le'olam, ve'melech kevodo et kol haaretz. Amen ve'amen.
And as we turn to 142, we rise.
Ve'varach David et Adonai le'nei kol ha'kahal ve'yomer David. Atahu Adonai Elohim asher bacharta be'Avram ve'hotzetu mi'ur chatzdim v'samta shemo Avraham u'matzate levavo ne'eman lefanecha v'charod imo abrit. Ve'hayam begatu lifneihem ve'avru v'toch hayam b'yabesha ve'edrod v'chem ichlachtu v'im solod kemo even b'mayim azim. Vayiru ha'am et Adonai ve'aminu be'Adonai u'Moshe avdo אז ישיר משה ובני ישראל את השיר הזאת לאדוני ויאמר לאמור השיר אל אדוני כי גאוגה סוס ורוחבו רמה וים עזי וזימיה ויהי לי לישועה זה לי וענווהו אלוהי ואהרון בביתו Adonai yimloch leolam voed, Adonai yimloch leolam voed. Gil Adonai hamlochau moshav hagoyim, v'alu moshim behar Tzion, nishparet har Esav, v'haital Adonai hamlocha, v'hei Adonai lamelech al kol haaretz, v'yom hu yeh Adonai echad, u'shemo echad.
And on 145, we can be seated as we get to Nishmat
Nishmat kol chai, tevarech et shimcha, Adonai Eloheinu. Nehalelcha u'neshebechacha u'nefarcha u'nevarech et shem kodshecha ka'amur leDavid baruchi nafshi et Adonai v'chol keravai et shem kadsho Oel b'tat shemod uzecha hagadol b'chvod shemecha hagibur l'netzar v'hanora b'norotecha hamelech hayoshev al kisei ram v'nisa.
Yesher Koach, and thank you. So we're on page 147, Shochenad, turning towards the Shacharit service.
Shochenad marom v'kadosh shemo
Shochenad marom v'kadosh shemo
V'chatuv ran tzadikim b'Adonai l'sharim navati la b'fi sharim titala u'v'divrei tzadikim titbarach u'vilshon chasidim titramam u'v'kerev kedushim titkadash u'v'makalot rivavot amcha bet Yisrael שכן חובת כל היצורים לפניך, נוי אלוהינו ולאבותינו ואמותינו, להודות, להלל, לשבח, לפאר, לרומם, להדר, לברך, להלל ולקלס, על כל דברי שירות ותשבחות, דוד בן ישי, עבדך משיחך, ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו. ברכות והודאות מעתה ועד עולם, ברוך אתה אדוני, אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודאות, אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך אלכי עולמים.
Amen. We'll rise,
יתקדש שמי רבה, ויעמד דבר קירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון ובימיכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל, בגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם ולעולמיה, יתברך וישתבח, ויפאר וירומם ויתנשא, וילדר וילעלה וילעלה שמי קדושה ברכו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירם בעלמא, ואמרו אמן. אמן. ברכו את אדוני המבורך. ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
We may be seated. Page 150.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם יוצר ובורא חושך עושה שלום ובורא את הכל הכל יודוך והכל ישבחוך והכל אין כערכך אדוני אלוהינו בעולם הזה, ואין זולתך מלכנו לחיי עולם הבא. אפס בלתך גולנו לימות המשיח, ואין דומה לך מושיענו לתחיית המתים.
Page 151.
אל אדון על כל המעשים, ברוך ומברך בפי כל נשמה. גדלו וטובו מלא עולם דעת ותבונה, סובבים אותו, המתגאה לחיות הקודש ונדע בכבוד על המרכבה, זכות ומשול לפני כיסו, חסד ורחמים לפני כבודו. טובים מאורות שברא אלוהינו, יצרם בדעת בבינה ובחסקל. כוח וגבורה נתן בהם להיות מושלים בקרב תבל, מלאים זיו ומפיקים נוגה נאה זיום בכל העולם, שמחים בצאתם וששים בבואם, עושים בהם הרצון קונם. פאר בכבוד נותנים לשמות צהלה ורינה לזכר מלכותו. קרא לשמש ויזרח אור רעה והתקין צורת הבנה, שבח נותנים לו כל צבא מרום, תפארת וגדולה, שרפים באופנים בחיות הקודש. לאל אשר שבת מכל המעשים. תתברך מושיענו על שבח מעשה ידיך, ועל מורה אור שעשית יפרוך הסלע.
We're on page 153.
תתברך צורינו מלכנו וגואלנו, בורא קדושים. כולם אהובים, כולם ברורים, כולם גיבורים, וכולם עושים בהם ובירא רצון קונם, וכולם פותחים את פיהם בקדושה ובטהרה, בשירה ובזמרה, ומברכים ומשבחים ומפארים ומעריצים, ומקדישים וממליכים. את שם האל, המלך הגדול, הגיבור והנורא קדוש הוא. וכולם מקבלים עליהם המלכות שמיים זה מזה, ונותנים רשות זה לזה, להקדיש ליוצרם בנחת רוח, בשפה ברורה ובנימה קדושה, כולם כאחד עונים באומרים ביראה, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך כל הארץ כבודו.
ואופנים וחרש קרו מנסים למצרפים תנועתם שפים ואומרים
ואופנים בחיות הקודש ברעש גדול מנסים למצרפים לעומתם משבחים ואומרים ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו לאל ברוך נמותיתנו
למלך החי וקיים זה עוד ימי ראש וישמיעו כי הוא לא פגרו עושה רבה מחמו.
אור חדש על ציון תאיר ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות.
אמן. Page 154.
אהבה רבה אהבתנו אדוני אלוהינו חמלה גדולה ותרחמת עלינו אבינו מלכנו בעבור אבותינו ואמותינו שבטחו בך אבינו מלכנו ותלמדם חוקי חיים, כן תכוננו תלמדנו, אבינו אב הרחמן, המרחם רחם עלינו. ותן בליבנו להבינו, להשכיל לשמוע, ללמוד וללמד, לשמוע ולעשות. ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה, והאר עינינו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך, ויחד לבבינו, ויחווה וירא את שמך, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, ולא נבוש לעולם ועד, כי בשם קודשך הגדול והנורא בטחנו, נגילה ונשמחה, נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך. והביאנו לשלום מארבע כנפות הארץ, ותוליכנו קוממיות לארצנו, כי אל פועל ישועת אתה, ובנו בחרת מכל עם בלשון, וקרבתנו לשמך הגדול, לשמך הגדול, סלע באמת להודות לך, ולייחדך באהבה. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך, והיה עם שמו תשמע.
On the top of 156.
ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם, ויעשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורתם, ונתנו על ציצית הכנף פתיל תכלת, והיה לכם לציצית, ראיתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. ויציב ונכון וקיים וישר ונאמן ואהוב וחביב ונחמד ונעים ונורא ואדיר ומתוקן ומקובל וטוב ויפה הדבר הזה עלינו לעולם ועד. אמת. לדור ודור קיים ושמו קיים בכיסו נכון ומלכותו ואמונתו לעד קיימת. וברך חיים. אמת שאתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו מלכנו מלך אבותינו ואמותינו גואלנו גואל אבותינו ואמותינו יוצרנו צור ישועתנו פודנו מצילנו מעולם שמך אין אלוהים זולתך עזרת אבותינו ואמותינו אתה הוא מעולם.
מה כן מושילים להם אחריהם בכל דור ודור ולעולם מושבך
אמת, 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 אתה הוא ראשון. אמת, 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 אתה הוא אחרון. ומבלעדיך אין לנו מלך, מלך גואל ומושיע. ומבלעדיך אין לנו מלך, מלך גואל ומושיע. ממצרים.
וזרים דיבת הימים העברת, יחסו מים זרם, אחד מהם לא נותר.
תהילות לעליון ברכו ומברך, משה מרים ובני ישראל לחנו שירה, בשמחה רבה ביאמרו כולם. מי כמוך, מי כמוך, מי כמוך, מי כמוך, מי כמוך, מי כמוך באלים אדוני. מי כמוך, מי כמוך, מי כמוך, מי כמוך, מי כמוך, מי כמוך נדר בקודש. נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה. שירה חדשה שיפחו גאולים לשמך, על שפת הים יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל ובטחנו ממך יהודה וישראל. גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני God Israel.
And the individual recitation of the Amidah begins on 159.
עוזי וזמרתיה, ויהי לישועה. עוזי זמרתיה, ויהי
לישועה.
עוזי וזמרתיה, ויהי לישועה. עוזי וזמרתיה, ויהי לישועה.
And the repetition will begin back on page 159.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'lo avotenu b'imotenu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah Ha'el HaGadol, HaGibor v'Hanora El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim B'konei HaKol B'zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imaot U'mevi Goel Livnei B'neihem Leman Shemo B'Yava Melech Ozer Ufoked U'Mashiach U'Magen Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham Ufoked Sarah Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechayei Metim Atah Rav Le'Hoshia Morid Hatal Mechalkel Chaim B'Chesed Mechayei Metim B'Rachamim Rabim Somech Noflim V'Rofech Cholim Umatir Asurim Umekayem Emunato Lishenei Afar
Michamocha Bal Gevurot Umidom Elah
Melech Memid Mechayem Umatzmiach Yeshua B'ne'eman atah l'chayot metim Baruch atah Adonai Mechayei hametim.
Amen. כשם שמעתי שמעת בשמי מרום, ככתוב
נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקתי שמותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה לזה ואמר, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוך על הארץ כבודו. אז בקול רעש גדול, אדיר וחזק, משמיעים קול, מתנשאים לעומת שרפים, לעומתם ברוך יאמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו.
תמלוך עלינו מחים אנחנו מתי תמלוך בציון בקרוב
במקומך מלכנו תופיע ותמלוך עלינו כי מחכים אנחנו לך במקומך מלכנו תופיע ותמלוך עלינו כי מחכים אנחנו לך מתי תמלוך בציון, תמלוך בציון, בקרוב בימינו, בקרוב בימינו, לעולם ועד תשכון, בקרוב בימינו, בקרוב בימינו, לעולם ועד תשכון, תתגדל ותתקדש, תתגדל ותתקדש, בתוך ירושלים, ירושלים עירך. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, ולנצח נצחים. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, ולנצח נצחים. ועינינו תיראנה, תיראנה מלכותך, כדבר האמור בשירי עוזך. ועינינו תיראנה, תיראנה מלכותך, כדבר האמור בשירי עוזך. על ידי דוד משיח צדקך, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון, לדור ודור, הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גדלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש. ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, כי המלך גדול וקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
Amen. We may be seated.
ישמח משה במתנת חלקו, כי עבד נאמן קראת לו, כליל תפארת בראשו נתת, ביעמדה לפניך על הר סיני, ושני לוחות אבנים הוריד בידו, וכתוב בהם שמירת שבת, וכתוב בהם שמירת שבת, וכן כתוב בתורתך, וכן כתוב בתורתך. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם, ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. כי 6 ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש. ולא נתתו אדוני אלוהינו לגויי הארצות, ולא הנחלת מלכנו לעבדי פסילים, וגם במנוחתו לא ישכנו ערלים. כי לישראל עמך נתתו באהבה, לזרע יעקב אשר בם בחרת. קדשי שביעי כולם יספו ויתענגו מטובך, והשביעי רצית בו וקידשתו. חמדת ימים אותו קראת, זכר למעשה וראשית. אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו רצה במנוחתנו. קדשנו במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך. סבנו מטובך, ושמחנו בישועתך, וטהר ליבנו לעבדך באמת, והנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו, באהבה וברצון, שבת קודשך, וינוחו בישראל. מקדשי שמך, ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש השבת. רצה אדוני אלוהינו בעמך ישראל ובתפילתם, והשב את עבודה לדביר ביתך, ותפילתם באהבה תקבל ברצון, ותהי לרצון תמיד עבודת ישראל עמך. ותחזינה עינינו בשובך לציון ברחמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, המחזיר שכינתו לציון, מודים אנחנו לך. טוב כי לא חלו רחמך, המר והמרחם, כי לא תמו חסדיך. טוב כי לא חלו רחמך והמרחם, כי לא תמו חסדיך מעולם מעולם, קיווינו לך מעולם מעולם, קיווינו לך. ועל כולם יתברך ויתרומם שמך מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד. בכל החיים יודוך סלע, והעלו את שמך באמת. האל ישורתנו ועזרתנו סלע, ברוך אתה אדוני. הטוב שמך ולכנע להודות.
Amen.
אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו, ברכנו ברכה המשולשת, בתורה כתובה על ידי משה עבדך, המורה מפי אהרון ובניו, כהנים עם קדושך כאמור. יברכך אדוני וישמרך.
כן יהי רצון.
יאר עיני פניו אליך ויחונקה.
כן יהי רצון.
יישא עיני פניו אליך וישם לך שלום.
כן יהי רצון.
שים שלום טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, עמך, עמך. ברכנו, ברכנו אבינו, כולנו כאחד. ברכנו, ברכנו אבינו, באור פניך. שים שלום טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, עמך, עמך. כי באור פניך נתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, תורת חיים ואהבת חסד, ואהבת חסד וצדקה וברכה, ורחמים וחיים בשלום. שים שלום טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, עמך, עמך. וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. שים שלום טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, עמך, עמך. ברוך אתה אדוני, המברך את עמו ישראל בשלום.
Amen. On page 167, Kaddish Shalem.
יתגדל ויתגדל שמי רבה, ויעמד דברי קראתי וימלך מחבותי, בחייכון ובימכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל, בעגלה בזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ומעלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויפאר וירומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקדושה ברכו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמירם ביעלמה ואמרו אמן. תתקבל צלותון ובתון דכל ישראל קדם אבותון דבשמי ואמרו אמן. יהי שלום רבה מן שמי וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו
Amen. And we'll turn back in our Sederim to page 112. A Psalm
היום
for
יום
Shabbat.
שבת. הודנו בספר דשנים ברנים יהיו להגיד כי ישר אדוני צורי ולא הפלטה בו.
And on 113, since we're in the month of Elul, Psalm 27.
לדוד נענה יוריב. יבית אדוני בכל ימי חייך. לולא האמנתי לראות בטוב עיני בארץ חיים, Kavel Adonai, chazak v'yametz libecha, b'kavel Adonai.
And we'll turn to page 121 for the Mourner's Kaddish. I invite anyone who's in a time of mourning or observing yortzites to rise and to recite with us. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbi, bi'alma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kari v'maru, amen. Yehi shmei Rabba mivorach leolam ulamei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitchomam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dikudashab richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiram bi'alma v'imru, amen. Yehi shlama Rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'romav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. So Yeshar Koch and Shacharit, and we'll continue with the Torah service. That's found on page 168.
En kamocha ve'Elohim Adonai v'en kemasecha malchutecha malchut kol olamim u'memshaltecha bechol dor v'dor Adonai melech
Adonai malach
Adonai iloch le'olam
vahed
Adonai oz le'amo yitein, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom, av harachamim,
Heitiv avirtzoncha et Zion, tivnei homot Yerushalayim, tivnei homot Yerushalayim, ki vecha levad batachnu, melech eram v'nisa, Adon olamim. Vayhi bin so Aharon, vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai, v'yafutzu oivecha, v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, udevar Adonai, b'Yerushalayim, Baruch Shenatan, Torah, Torah, Baruch Shenatan, Torah, Torah, Le'amo Yisrael, B'Kedushato. Be'be'an harachet, Ve'lishme kadisha, Kadisha Yakira, Anahelar Tushbechan, Be'anares, Be'anares, Ve'lishme Kadisha, Kadisha Yakira, Anahelar Tushbechan, Yehei Rabba Padamach, Tetiv Ta'afiri V'yoraita, V'tashlim Nishal
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Gadlu Adonai iti uneromema Shemo yachdav. Lecha Adonai hagedula v'hagivura v'hatiferet v'hanetzach v'haod ki cho b'shamayim u'va'aretz. Lecha Adonai hamamlecha v'hamitnase lecho lerosh. Romemu, Romemu, Adonai Eloheinu, ve'ishtachavu, ve'ishtachavu, ladom raglav kadosh hu. Romemu, Romemu, Adonai Eloheinu, ve'ishtachavu, ve'ishtachavu lecha kodsho ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Yai dai da danda, yai dai da danda, yai dai danda da, yana da da da, yai dai danda, yai dai danda. Yai dai da da da, yana da da da. Yai dai da da da, yana da, ya da 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 da, yana da, yana da 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 da, yana da, yana da, ya da 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 da, yana da, yai dai 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 dai.
Yep, it's really good. Oh, there's one. There's two. There's a different one. There's two on SMS. You know what? I think I got them marked.
So, Joy Yesher Kochab, beautiful davening. Nice to meet everyone. It's still hard for me not to shake during the Hakafah, but I'm Eric Rosin, and it's a pleasure to be here this weekend. You've probably heard me cough a little bit. My voice is a little bit hoarse, and I want to assure everyone that my most recent rapid test was this morning. I've taken many over this past week, and all negative so far. So just an opening word about the Torah portion itself. We're reading Shoftim this week. And maybe the most, I can take this off, I guess, for a moment. Maybe the most interesting thing about the Torah portion is that it's in the Torah at all. Right? The Torah is our spiritual heart. It's our religious text. And this Torah portion is really a bunch of job descriptions. It describes the role of judges and magistrates, witnesses, litigants, priests, kings, prophets, soldiers, and communal leaders. And what's interesting about each of them is the way that they're described. When we think about a document that would set forth a social structure like this, the first thing that comes to mind is the Constitution. And what the Constitution does is it defines all of the different branches of the government and then the powers that each one possesses. And this week, what we learn about is each of these roles and the limitations that they have. So we start out the very beginning of the Torah portion, Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha, and it's translated as you should appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes. And the Hasidim, they say, titen lecha, you should give to yourself. They say what that means is that you should want to be judged. And you should judge yourself the way that you'd want to be judged, with the same kind of mercy and the same kind of understanding. And only when you've done that should you judge others. And only judge others the way you want to be judged yourself. And then it goes on to say, the text itself goes on to say that judges have to judge according to, of course, justice and morality and the principles of our text. And it continues on, kings are not defined by their ability to rule or by the powers they have. Kings are told in our text that they shouldn't be too ostentatious. They shouldn't have too many horses or wives. They shouldn't, pardon me, and that they should always keep a copy of the Torah nearby to understand that their power is defined by our tradition. Their power is not defined by who they are. And even advancing armies in this Torah portion, which is maybe the most basic exercise of power, an advancing army, when it comes to a city, first has to sue for peace. So it's not about the power it has, it's about the constraint on that power. And when an army lays siege, there's this interesting observation that we won't go into, that they shouldn't cut down fruit trees. The last section, and I'll talk about this after the Torah reading, is about the role of communal leaders. And I'll talk about that both because that's what we'll be reading and because I think that's what's most relevant to us. But I think when you put all of this together, what it leads to is the explanation of why this is in the Torah. That leadership in our tradition is really a spiritual practice. Leadership in this tradition is how we work together as a community to bring God's presence into the world. In addition to prayer and study, the way that we govern our society and the way that we use power are ways that we build a society that's marked by compassion, that's marked by a respect for each other's dignity. In the language of Simon Sinek, who's a big business writer these days, what this tells us about leadership, it's not what we can do as leaders, it's why we should do it. And the why we should do this is because no matter what any single person's status is, whether they're a king, whether they're a judge, or whether they're a citizen or a work person, each person plays a role in building a world and a community in which justice and humility and compassion are what define us. So our role, and the reason that this is in our central text, is because our job is to take this and internalize it and then exhibit this for the rest of the world to see as well. So with that, we'll begin with the first reading for this morning. And that's found on page, I believe, 1097, the very beginning of chapter 19.
V'ya'azor, v'yagen v'yoshir l'chol chachosim bo, v'nomar amen. Hakol havu godel Eloheinu, utnu chavod laTorah. Kohen krav, yamod hakohen. Baruch shenatan Torah l'yamo Yisrael, בקדושתו.
ואתם הדבקים באדוני אלוהיכם חיים כולכם היום.
ואתם הדבקים באדוני אלוהיכם חיים כולכם היום. ברכו את אדוני המבורך. ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו תורתו, ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
אמן. כי יחריט אדוני אלוהיך את הגויים, אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך את ארצם, וירשתם, וישבת בעריהם ובבתיהם. 3 ערים תבדיל לך בתוך ארצך, אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך לרשתה. תכין לך הדרך, ושילשת את גבול ארצך, אשר ינחילך אדוני אלוהיך, והיה לנוס שמה כל רוצח. וזה דבר הרוצח אשר ינוס שמה וחי, אשר יכה את רעהו בבלי דעת, והוא לא שונא לו מתמול שלשום.
ברוך אתה, אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם, נטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה, אדוני נותן התורה.
תעמוד לוי, מי שברך אבותינו אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, שרה רבקה רחל ולאה, הוא יברך את דורון יצחק בן ברוך הכהן ואריאלה, שעלה היום לכבוד המקום ולכבוד התורה ולכבוד השבת. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור אותו ואת כל משפחתו, וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיו, עם כל ישראל אחד, ונאמר אמן.
And we're in verse 5, page 1098.
ברוך הוא אדוני המבורך, ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים, ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה. אמן. ואשר יבוא את רעהו ביער לחטוב עצים, ונדחה ידו בגרזן לכרות העץ, ונשל הברזל מן העץ, ומצא את רעהו ומת. הוא ינוס אל אחת ההרים האלה וחי, פן ירדוף גואל הדם אחרי הרוצח, כי יחם לבבו, והשיגו כי ירבה הדרך והיכהו נפש, ולא אין משפט מוות, כי לא שונאהו לו מתמול שלשום. על כן אנוכי מצווך לאמור, 3 ערים תבדיל לך, ואם ירחיב אדוני אלוהיך את גבולך, כאשר נשבע לאבותיך, ונתן לך את כל הארץ, אשר דיבר לתת לאבותיך. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת, וחיי עולם נוצר בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
תעמוד שלישי, מי שברך אבותינו אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, שרה רבקה רחל ולאה, הוא יברך את נחמה בת שמעון הלוי ואסתר, שעלתה היום לכבוד המקום ולכבוד התורה ולכבוד השבת. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור אותה ואת כל משפחתה, וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיה, עם כל ישראל אחיה, ונאמר אמן.
You usually stay. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
אמן. כי תשמות כל המצווה הזאת לעשותה, אשר אנוכי מצווך היום, לאהבה את אדוני אלוהיך וללכת בדרכיו כל הימים, ויספת לך עוד 3 ערים על ה3 האלה, לא ישפך דם נקי בקרב ארצך אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך נחלה, והיה לך דמים, וכי יהיה איש שונא לרעהו, וערב לו וקם עליו ויקחו נפש ומת, ונס אל אחד הערים האל. וישלחו זקני עירו ולקחו אותו משם, ונתנו אותו ביד גואל אדם ומת, לא תכוס עיניך עליו, וביערת דם הנקי מישראל, וטוב לך.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet b'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Talmud Revi, Mi sheberach avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel v'Leah, Hu yivarech et Chana bat Eliyahu v'Pesha, שעלתה היום לכבוד המקום ולכבוד התורה ולכבוד השבת. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור אותה ואת כל משפחתה, וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיה, עם כל ישראל אחיה, ונאמר אמן.
And I believe we're at the bottom of page 1099, verse 14.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai מברך לעולם ועד.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
אמן. לא תשיג גבול רעך, אשר גבולו ראשונים, ונחלתך אשר תנחל בארץ, אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך לרשתה, לא יקום עד אחד באיש לכל עוון, לכל חטאת ובכל חטא אשר יחטא, על פי 2 עדים או על פי 3 עדים יקום דבר, כי יקום עד חמאס באיש לענות בו שרה, ועמדו 2 אנשים אשר להם עריף לפני אדוני ולפני הכהנים והשופטים אשר יהיו בימים ההם.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Talmud Chamishi, Mi sheberach avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel v'Leah, Hu yivarech et Yael bat Moshe uMiriam, שעלתה היום לכבוד המקום ולכבוד התורה ולכבוד השבת. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור אותה ואת כל משפחתה, וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיה, עם כל ישראל אחיה, ונאמר אמן. מי שברך אבותינו, אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, שרה רבקה, רחל ולאה, הוא יברך וירפא את כל החולים. הקדוש ברוך הוא ימלא רחמים עליהם, לחזקם ולרפאותם, וישלח להם מהרה רפואה שלמה מן השמיים, רפואת הנפש ורפואת הגוף בתוך שאר החולים, וחזק את ידי העוסקים בצרכיהם. שבת היא מלזרוק רפואה קרובה לבוא, השתה בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ונאמר אמן.
שברך אבותינו מקור הברכה לאמותינו. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach imotenu mekor habracha leavotenu. Bless those in need of healing, refuah shlema, the renewal of the body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say,
Amen. All right, there.
And the fifth reading is on page 1100, beginning with verse 18.
Baruch et Adonai Hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen. V'darshu hashavtim hetev v'hinei sheker ha'ed sheker ana ve'achiv v'asitem lo asher zamam v'asot le'achiv uviarta hara mikirbecha v'hanisharim yishmu v'ra'u V'lo yosifu lasot od kadavar hara hazeh v'kirbecha v'lo tachos einecha nefesh b'nefesh ayin b'ayin shein b'shein yad b'yad regel b'regel.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
Yamod Shishi. Mi sheberach avotenu Avraham, Yitzchak v'Yakov, Sarah Rivka, Rachel v'Leah, Hu yivarech et Alana bat Reuven v'Yael, she'alta yom l'kvod hamakom v'l'kvod ha'torah v'l'kvod ha'shabbat. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yishmor ota v'et kol mishpachta, v'yishlach bracha v'hatzlacha b'chol masei yadeha, im kol Yisrael acheha, v'nomar Amen.
Baruch Adonai Barach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'torah.
כי תצא למלחמה על אויביך, וראית סוס ורכב עם רב ממך, לא תירא מהם, כי אדוני אלוהיך עמך, המלאכה מארץ מצרים, והיה כקרבכם על מלחמה, וניגש הכהן, ודיבר אל העם, ויאמר עליהם, שמע ישראל, אתם קרובים היום למלחמה על אויביכם, אל ירק לבבכם, אל תיראו ואל תחזו ואל תרצו מפניהם, כי אדוני אלוהיכם ההולך עמכם להילחם לכם עם אויביכם להושיע אתכם.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah temet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
יעמדו שביעי מי שברך אבותינו אברהם יצחק ויעקב שרה רבקה רחל ולאה הוא יברך את משה ראובן בן שמואל מנחם ושרה רחל שעלה היום לכבוד המקום ולכבוד התורה ולכבוד השבת הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור אותו ואת כל משפחתו וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיו עם כל ישראל אחיו ונאמר אמן.
We're on page 1102, verse 5.
ברכו את אדוני המבורך.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
אמן. ודיברו השוטרים אל העם לאמור, מי האיש אשר בנה בית חדש ולא חנכו, ילך וישוב לביתו פן ימות במלחמה, ואיש אחר יחנכנו. ומי האיש אשר נטע כרם ולא חיללו, ילך וישוב לביתו פן ימות במלחמה, ואיש אחר יחללנו. ומי האיש אשר ירש אישה ולא לקחה, ילך וישוב לביתו פן ימות במלחמה, ואיש אחר ייקחנה. ויצפו השוטרים לדבר לעם ואמרו, מי האיש הירא ורך הלבב, ילך וישוב לביתו ולא ימאס את לבב אחיו כלבבו. והיה ככלות השוטרים לדבר אל העם, ופקדו שרי צבאות בראש העם.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נבטה בכוחנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
מי שברך אבותינו אברהם יצחק ויעקב שרה רבקה רחל ולאה הוא יברך את אלנה פרלה בת דב ואסתר ואת משה יוסף בן יצחק וליבה אשר עלו היום לכבוד המקום ולכבוד התורה ולכבוד השבת. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור אותם ואת משפחותם, וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם, עם כל ישראל אחיכם, ונאמר אמן. יעמוד מפטיר. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
Amen.
בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי.
וחייך עוד יום אחד, וחיי בכל בית ישראל.
בזמן קריב אמרו
אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם ולעלמיה.
יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה, ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה,
Rehu.
לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה.
תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירת מעלמה.
אמרו
אמן.
ברכו את אדוני מבורך.
ברוך אדוני מבורך לעולם ועד.
ברוך אדוני מבורך לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
If you would just hold this side steady, I appreciate it.
אמן וענו ואמרו ידינו לא שפכו את הדם הזה ועינינו לא ראו כפה למך ישראל אשר פדית אדוני ואל תיתן דם נקי בקרב עמך ישראל ונקפל להם הדם ואתה תבער הדם הנקי מקרבך כי תעשה הישר בעיני אדוני.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
יעמוד המגביה, תעמוד הגוללת. מי שברך אבותינו, אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, שרה רבקה, רחל ולאה, הוא יברך את יעקב, דוד בן יוסף הלוי וחיה, שעלה היום לכבוד המקום ולכבוד התורה ולכבוד השבת. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור אותו ואת כל משפחתו, ישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיו, עם כל ישראל אחיו, ונאמר אמן.
זאת התורה ששם משה
לפני בני ישראל, ביד אדוני, ביד משה. חיים היא למחזיקים בה, ותומכי המאושר. חיים היא למחזיקים בה, ותומכי המאושר. דרכיה דרכנו, תיבותיה שלום, דרכיה דרכנו, תיבותיה שלום.
He has it. I think this might be Ben's. See if this is Ben's.
Hashivenu
Yameinu Chadesh Yameinu Kedem.
And the Haftarah can be found on page 1108. We're in the fourth Haftarah of consolation between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, and they're all from the book of Isaiah, page 1108.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'ratza b'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah u'Moshe abdo u'Yisrael amo u'b'nviei hamet v'tzedek. Anochi, Anochi, hu menachemchem miyad batiri menosh yamud umi ben adam chatzir yinaten vatishkach Adonai osecha noter shamayim v'yoseh le'aretz ותפחד תמיד כל היום מפני חמת המציק כאשר כונן להשחית ואיה חמת המציק מהר צוער להיפתח ולא ימות לשחת ולא יחסר לחמו ואנוכי אדוני אלוהיך רוגע הים ויהמו גליו אדוני צבאות שמו מעשים דברי בפיך ובצל ידי כיסיתיך לנטוע שמיים ולסוד הארץ ולאמור לציון עמי אתה. התעוררי, התעוררי, קומי ירושלים אשר שתית מיד אדוני את כוס חמתו את קובת כוס התרלה שתית מצית הן מנהלה מכל בנים ילדה והן מחזיק בידה מכל בנים גידלה. שתיים הנה קוראותייך מיענוד לך השוד והשבר והרעה והחרב מענפמך ענייך ולפו שכבו בראש כל חוצות כתוב מחמר המלאים חמת אדוני גרת אלוהיך לכן שמינה זאת ענייה ושחורת ולא מיין כה אמר אדונייך אדוני ואלוהיך יריב עמו הנה לקחתי מידך את כוס התרלה את קובת כוס חמתי לא תוסיפי לשתותה עוד ושמתיה ביד מוגייך אשר אמרו לנפשך שכי ונעבורה ותשימי הארץ גבך וחצות לעוברים אורי אורי לבשי עוזך ציון לבשי בגדי תפארתך ירושלים עיר הקודש כי לא יוסיף יבוא בך עוד ערב וטמא הנערי מעפר קומי שבי ירושלים התפתחי מוסרי צווארך שביעה בת ציון כי כה אמר אדוני חינם נמכרתם ולא בכסף תגאלו כי כה אמר אדוני אלוהים מצרים ירד עמי בראשונה לגור שם וישור באפס אשקו ויתם אליפון אדוני כי לוקח עמי חינם מושלב יהללי לנו אדוני ותמיד כל היום שמי מנועץ לכן ידע מי שמי לכן ביום ההוא כי אני הוא המדבר הנני מה נבוא על ההרים רגלי מבשר משמיע שלום מבשר טוב משמיע ישועה, אומר לציון מלאך אלוהיך, כל צופייך, נשאו כל יחדיו ירננו, כי יין בעין ירו בשוב אדוני לציון, פיצחו רננו יחדיו חורבות ירושלים, כי ניחם אדוני עמו גאל ירושלים. חשף אדוני את זרוע קודשו לעיני כל הגויים, וראו כל אפסי הארץ את ישועת אלוהינו. סורו סורו צאו משם, טמא אל תיגעו, צאו מתוכה היבערו, נושא כלי אדוני, כי לא בחיפזון תצאו, ובמנוסה לא תלכו. כי הולך לפניכם אדוני, ומאס פסיפכם, אלוהי ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, צור כל העולמים, צדיק בכל הדורות, האל הנאמן, האומר ועושה, המדבר ומקיים, שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. נאמן אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו, ונאמנים דבריך, ודבר אחד מדבריך, אחור לא ישוב ריקם, כי המלך נאמן ורחמן, אתה ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הנאמן בכל דבריו.
אמן.
רחם על ציון כי היא בית חיינו, ולעלובת נפש תושיע במהרה בימינו. ברוך אתה אדוני, משמח ציון בבניה. שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו באליהו הנביא עבדך ובמלכות בית דוד משיחך. במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו, על כיסאו לא ישב זר, ולא ינחלו עוד אחרים את כבודו. כי בשם קודשך נשבעת לו, שלך בנירו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן דוד.
אמן.
על התורה ועל עבודה ועל הנביאים ועל יום השבת הזה, שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך, יתברך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת.
Amen.
And Yishkach for everyone who's davened and read this. This has just been a beautiful morning of davening and reading, so thank you, everyone. Has someone been asked to read the prayer for the country? I don't think I have that name. So the prayer for our country is on page 177. Thank you.
Page 177, the alternate prayer. Our God and God of our ancestors, grant to our country the will and wherewithal to fulfill its calling to justice, liberty, and equality. May each of us fulfill our responsibilities of citizenship with care, generosity, and gratitude, ever conscious of the extraordinary blessing of freedom, ever mindful of our duties to one another. Bless those who volunteer to labor on behalf of us all. May they find the strength and courage to complete their tasks and fulfill their dreams. May our God's elected leaders and all who hold public office exercise their responsibilities with wisdom, fairness, and justice for all. Fill them with love and kindness and bless them that they may walk with integrity on the paths of peace and righteousness. Creator and protector of all, watch over our armed forces and all those entrusted with our safety as they daily put their lives at risk to protect us and our freedoms. Be with them in times of danger. Give them courage to act with honor and dignity, as well as insight to do what is right in your eyes. Fill us all with the gifts of love and courage, that we may create a world that reflects your glory. May we each respond to the charge of your prophet. For what does Adonai demand of you but to act justly, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? May the one who brings peace on high bring peace and prosperity to our world and keep us in safety. And let us say, Amen.
Thank you. And the prayer for the state of Israel is on top of page 178.
Avinu Shabbat Shamayim, Tzur Yisrael v'go'alo, B'harech Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Shmichat Gerulatenu. Hagen Aleha be'arat chazecha, Ufrosh Aleha suchat shlomecha, Ushlach orcha v'yamicha l'rasheha, Sareha v'yotzeha, V'taknei be'etzat fanecha, Chazek et yidei migimei eretz kodshenu, V'hankilem Eloheinu
Yeshua,
V'ateret nitzachon tatrem, V'natata shalom ba'aretz, V'simchat olam yoshveha, V'nomar Amen.
Thank you. And just below that, the prayer for peace.
May we see the day when war and bloodshed cease, when a great peace will embrace the whole world.
The nation will not threaten nation, and the human family will not again know war.
For all who live on earth shall realize we have not come into being to hate or to destroy. We have come into being to praise, to labor, and to love.
Compassionate God, bless the leaders of all nations with the power of compassion.
Fulfill the promise conveyed in Scripture. I will bring peace to the land, and you shall lie down, and no one shall terrify you.
I will rid the land of vicious beasts, and it shall not be ravaged by war.
Let justice and righteousness flow like a mighty stream. Let God's peace fill the earth as the waters fill the sea. And let us say, Amen.
Amen. And as we come to the end of the Torah service, Ashrei is on page 181. Shabbat shalom.
Ashrei yoshvei veitecha, oje halalucha selah.
Ashrei am shekacha lo, Ashrei am sharonai Eloha.
Tehila leDavid, aromimcha Elohai hamelech, ve'avacha shimcha leolam va'ed.
Bechol yom avarheka, v'alala shimcha leolam va'ed.
Gadol Adonai hulal meod, ve'ligdulato ein cheker.
Dor l'dor shabach ma'asecha, ugvaratecha yagidu.
Hadar kivod hodecha, ve'divrei nifilotecha asicha.
Ve'zuzratecha yomeru, udracha asaprena.
Zecher rav tufa yabiu, ve'tzidkatcha yarnenu.
Chanun v'rachum Adonai, erech apayim ugdol chesed.
Tov Adonai lakol, v'rachamav al kol ma'asav.
Yovduch Adonai kol ma'asecha, v'chasidecha yevarchucha.
Kevod malchutcha yomeru, uvuratcha yedaberu.
Lehodir livnei Adam gvurotav, ugvod hadar malchuto.
Malchutcha malchut kol olamim, umemshatacha b'chol dor v'ador.
Somech Adonai l'chol hanoflim, v'zokef l'chol hakfufim.
Einei chol elecha yisaberu, ve'ata noten lahem et achlam beito.
Poteach et yadecha, umaspia l'chol chayratzon.
Tzadik Adonai b'chol derachav, v'chasid b'chol ma'asav.
Karov Adonai l'kol korav, l'chol asher yikrahu v'emet.
Ritzon yirav ya'aseh, ve'et shavatam yishma v'yoshiem.
Shomer Adonai et kol avav, et kol rishayim yashmid.
Tehilat Adonai yedaber pi, v'varech kol basar shem kodsho le'olam va'ed.
V'anachnu nevarech ya,
Be'ata
v'yad
olam.
Alleluia.
And on 183, we return the Torah to the Ark.
Hallelujah, et Shem Adonai, ki nisgav Shemo levado. Yaren keren liamo, hila lecho hasidav, lifnei Israel am kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah, mizmor leDavid, havu ladonai b'nei elim, havu ladonai kavod va'oz, havu ladonai kivod shemo, ishtachavu ladonai behadrat kodesh. Kol Adonai el hamayim, el hakavod hirim, Adonai el mayim rabim. Kol Adonai ba'koach, Kol Adonai behadar, Kol Adonai shover arazim, Vaishaber Adonai et arzeh halvanon. Vayarkidem kemo egel, Levanon vesiryon, kemo ben remim. Kol Adonai hotze lavodesh, Kol Adonai yachil midbar, Yachil Adonai midbar kadesh, Kol Adonai yechol elai alod. Vayechesof Ya'arot, Ufche halo, Kulo omer kavod. Adonai lamabu yashav, Vayeshev Adonai melech leolam. Adonai os le'amo yitain, Adonai yevarech et amo b'shalom. Ufnucho yomar. Hilech haktov natati lachem, Torati al tazovu. Ei chayim la'achazik yuva, ei tom heva neusha, derachecha, darcheno, ve'ol nesivotecha, shalom. Hashirenu Adonai, elecha v'nashua, Haaretz, Haaretz Yameinu, Haaretz Yameinu,
Once again, thank you all for welcoming me. It's been just a beautiful morning. Lovely to be here. When we began the Torah reading, I talked about the fact that Parshat Shoftim is really about Jewish definitions of how leaders are supposed to use their power. What's the role of a leader in the Jewish community? And being conscious of where I am geographically, I have no doubt there are probably, if not judges and magistrates, certainly many officers of the court here, that there may be people who are seen as prophets in their professional communities or, nationally, certainly maybe over the Shabbat table. But this week we read the third triennial, and the third triennial really talks about communal leaders. And in a community like this where I've seen so much collaboration, we all really meet that definition. So what is the responsibility of a communal leader? And it's not entirely clear. In the very last part of this morning's reading, some of it we read out loud as the Maftir, and some of it was just before that. There's this confusing story of the Egel Arufa, that when a murder victim, the body of the victim of a murder is found outside of any city, the elders of the different cities nearby have to go by and measure and see which city was closest, and the leaders of the closest city have to come and perform this ritual. And they sacrifice a calf, a cow, and they say these words, we didn't shed this blood, but we take responsibility in this way. So there you go. That's the definition of communal leadership, and I hope that's clear. Or if it's not incredibly clear, we can at least understand why it's not so clear. Because the event that the leaders are responding to is nothing they had control over. The event is something that took place outside of the area they control. And none of their, shotrim, none of their policemen or guards could have prevented it. And yet, that's their responsibility. So my first thought, as it often is when I'm reading through the Torah portion, was to think to Rabbi Heschel. And while I've seen this elsewhere, I'm always going to think of it as a teaching from Rabbi Heschel because it was in an essay that he wrote about the Vietnam War. And he observed that, some are guilty, but all are responsible. That there's this sense that even if it took place outside of a given city, just because it was nearby, the leadership of that city are responsible. Still not completely satisfied, though. And the second part of this clip was crystallized for me when I was taking a class prepared to be an interim member of the clergy. It was an interfaith class. It was rabbis and ministers and priests. And we read a book by a gentleman named Gil Rendell. And it was on the theory of systems management. And it applied specifically to synagogues and churches. And he made this observation, and for him it was almost a throwaway, that 50% of the factors that will dictate the success or failure of a religious community are outside the control of that religious community. And it really took the wind out of my sails. Because I've been a rabbi for 20 years, I've been an involved Jew for much longer than that. And without even acknowledging it, my unspoken assumption was always that if we make the best decisions we can, and we do the work, things are going to happen, right? If we can figure out that absolutely perfect membership model, if we can design that family Shabbat programming that's going to bring everyone in, if we can understand how to have people who may not want to join full freight support the parts of the synagogue, well, gosh, then our success should be ensured. And I read this text and I thought, we know that's not always the case, right? I'd never thought about that arrogance on my own part. Synagogue boards plan and God laughs, and rabbis plan and God laughs. So that's what this Torah portion is about as well, this section of this passage. It's about the responsibility of those communal leaders to show up and respond to a crisis that was completely not of their making, to show up and respond to something that they couldn't have prevented. And the truth is, that's our job as well. In a very literal sense, our worlds are changed because of the violence that takes place outside of these walls. In a very real sense, we live in a world where even though we may not be able to control whole systems, things like racism, things like inequity, they have a deep influence on us, and we have to stand up and respond. And in terms of synagogues, the allegory, the similar situations are all of those things that we have no control over. It doesn't matter what the board plans in terms of the demographics of a specific geographic area. And it doesn't matter how great the rabbi's sermon is in terms of just the changing sociology of American religious life. I'm told that there's been a pandemic for the last couple of years, and that it's still here. And we didn't cause that. And it's had a profound effect on this community and every community. And of course, I'm here because of an unexpected change in rabbinic leadership. And what we learned this morning is that the role of the leader, of course, is to plan for everything we can plan for. But it's also to show up when those things we have absolutely no control over arise, and to fully say, we're here. You know, I read the passage in the Torah portion itself, and the passage that the elders are supposed to say, the elders of the community. Let's see if I can find it again. The elders of the town nearest to the corpse wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the wild, and they make this declaration: our hands didn't shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done. And that's where I add this midrash. But we're still here. But our responsibility is to show up even though this was not of our doing. So what we learned from the Torah reading this week is really a lesson in anava, in humility. In thinking of humility in a musar sense of saying, we know we don't have complete control over everything, but we know that each moment demands something of us. And that when these crises come up, even if they're not of our making, what's demanded of us is to show up. What's demanded of us is to think of what is the appropriate response. It's very clear from everything I've seen in all of my interactions with this community that everyone here really is a leader. All the different people who helped lead this morning all did beautifully, and I've had conversations already with people who are part of a long-term planning committee, a strategic plan. Everyone here is that leader who says, our obligation is to show up. So this week I leave us with this thought that sometimes leaders guide events, and sometimes leaders respond to events. But what's within our texts is our commitment to be present and to work together through whatever crises arise and from whatever source. And with that thought, we'll move to the Musaf service.
Yikadal v'yikadash shemei Rabba.
Amen.
Be'alma divra kirotei ve'amlich mahutei. B'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael. B'agalau v'zman kariv v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yehi shmei Rabba mevarach. Le'olam olam
me'almaya. Yitbarach.
Yitbarach v'yishtabak. V'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalei v'yitalal shmei dekudashah.
Brichu.
Elam min kol berchata v'shirata. Tushbehata v'nechemata. Damiran b'yalma v'imru amen.
Amen. And on page 185, we rise and we'll begin together.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei Hakol, V'Zocher Hasdei Avot v'Imahot, ומביא גואל לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ופוקד ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע, מוריד הטל. מחכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה. ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים. נריצך ונקדישך, כסות שיח שרפי קודש, המקדישים שמך בקודש, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות מלך כל הארץ כבודו. כבודו מלא עולם, משרתיו שואלים זה לזה, איה מקום כבודו לעומתם, ברוך יאמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. ממקומו הוא יפן ברחמים ויחונם, המייחדים שמו ערב ובוקר בכל יום תמיד, פעמיים באהבה, שמה אומרים, שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. יאי לי 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 לי, יאי לי 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 לי, יאי לי 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 לי, יאי לי לי, יאי לי לי, יאי לי 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 לי, יאי לי 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 לי, יאי לי 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 לי, יאי לי לי, יאי לי לי, yai la 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 la, yai la la, yai la la, yai la 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 la, yai la 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 la, yai la la la, yai la la la, yai la la la, yai la la la. Hu Eloheinu, Hu Avinu, Hu Malkeinu, Hu Moshienu, Vehu Yashmienu, Bracham Av Shenit, Shenit Liene, Liene Kol Chai, Liot Lahem Lelohim, Ani Adonai Elohim. Yai dai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai dai dai. Uvdevrei kodshecha katuv lemor, imloch Adonai leolam, Elohai Zion, ledor vador, Alleluia. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתה נקדיש, ושבחה אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, כי המלך גדול וקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש. La 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 la. Oh, say shalom b'mroma. Ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru Amen.
And Kaddish Shalom is on page 203.
Yikadav yikadash shemei Rabba.
Amen.
Ve'alma divra kiyotei, ve'amlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon, uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, b'agalav v'zman kariv v'imru Amen.
Amen.
Yehi shmei Rabba mevarach, le'alam olal me'almaya.
Yitvara.
Yitbarak v'yishtabak v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitalei v'yitalal shmei dekudasha.
Brichu.
Le'amin kol berchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran b'alma v'imru Amen.
Amen.
Ti kabal slot hon uvalt hon, dechol Yisrael, kadama v'hon devishmaya v'imru Amen.
Amen.
Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru Amen.
And on 204, Ein Kelohenu, do we have anyone who'd be willing to come up and help support our Ein Kelohenu, maybe under the 13 set?
Ein Kelohenu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkeinu,
Ein
Moshienu, Mikelohenu, Kadonenu, Mikemalkeinu, Mikemoshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shetiru Avoteinu. Eloheinu lefanecha ketoret hasamim. Yai la 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 la, yai la la, yai la la, yai la la, yai la 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 la.
And on page 205, Aleinu.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon ha'kol, l'tei kedula l'yotzer breshit, shelo asanu b'goyei ha'ratzot, velo asanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam helkeinu kahem, v'tor aleinu k'kol hamonam, v'anachnu kurim, u'mishpachalim u'modim, lifnei melech, malchei amladim, hakadosh baruch hu. Shehu notei shamayim v'yosed haaretz, u'moshav yikaro b'shamayim mima'al, u'shhinatu zo, megavhe meromim. Hu Eloheinu ein od, emet malkeinu ezulato, kakatu v'torato, ve'yata hayom ve'hashevota el livaveha, ki Adonai hu Elohim, b'shamayim
Imaha.
v'al haaretz, mitachat ein od. Al ken nekave l'chadonai Eloheinu, lirot meher ad biferet uzeha, lehavir gilulim min haaretz, ve'ha'eli karetun, letaken olam b'malchut Shaddai, v'chol b'nei basar yekru v'shemecha, lehafnod elecha kol rishei haaretz, yakiru v'yedu kol yoshev tevel, ki lecha tikra kol berek, tishava kol lashon, lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu yekru ve'yipolo, ve'lichvot shim hayikayitenu, v'kablu kulam ekol malchutecha, ve'timloch alehem mera leolam va'ed. Ki hamaluk shalachi uleu me'ad, timloch v'chavod. Kakatu betoratecha, Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. V'ne'emar v'chaye Adonai, lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu yehiyeh Adonai echad u'shmo echad.
Eshkochech, beautiful. And we may be seated again. We'll pause for a moment so that we can honor the memories of those of our loved ones whom death has taken from us. This week, we honor the memory of Isabel Plesset, the mother of Marjorie Plesset, Robert Skutecki, the father of Ilana Breslaw, Barbara Barron, the mother of Sarah Steinberg, David Tanny, the cousin of Daniel Simpkins, Summer Moskovitz, the grandfather of Mike Druckman, Leah Tuchman, the grandmother of Ilana Bar-Levav, Ursula Bamberger, the mother of Annette Lieber, Marianne Strauss, the mother of Julie Maltzman and the grandmother of Rebecca Maltzman, Calvin Arnett, the father of Arlene Heyman, Esther Light, the mother of Nancy Light, Dorothy Pomerantz, the aunt of Julie Rabinowitz, Lindsay Mershon, the daughter of Jay and Allison Mershon, Daniel Ferguson, the grandfather of Benjamin Borstein, Evelyn Magid, the aunt of Sarah Horowitz, Sarah Flamenbaum, the mother of Harold Flamenbaum, Anna Brand, the grandmother of Laura Leifman, Samuel Alpert, the grandfather of Leslie Silver, and Stephen Loeb, the father of Bob Loeb. And if there's anyone I've missed, please feel free to offer a name. I invite anyone who's in a time of mourning or observing a yahrzeit to rise and to recite the mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah, B'alma divra kirute v'yamlich malchute, B'chayechon uv'yomechon, uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, V'agala uv'izman kariv v'maru. Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah mevorach leolam u'lomei almaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitchomam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalal, Shemei d'kudasha b'reichu, la'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'miram v'yalma v'imru. Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabbah min Shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. O say shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. So it's a pleasure to invite presidential announcements.
Shabbat shalom. Can everybody hear me on Zoom? Great. It is so nice to see all of you this morning and on Zoom. I have been, knocking wood and rubbing rabbits' feet all week, and given the attendance and the beautiful service and the wonderful sermon, it's working, so happy to report that. I just wanted to specifically thank the Daveners this morning, Ken and Julia, who worked very hard along with the rest of the committee, who I will name Mark Bilski, Daron Friedberg, Nancy Light, and Dana Peretz for the interim search committee for this morning's service. And then, of course, Steve Levine, Shulamit Elsner, Alan, Mike Druckman, David Spiegel, Ben Bornstein, JL, and, of course, Mary. So thank you. I also wanted to just thank Elisa and Julia specifically, who helped put this weekend and service together. There was a lot of logistics and moving around, so thank you very much for that. All right. So we have a Kiddush after this service, and it's been sponsored by the interim search committee in honor of Julia and all of her hard work over these past couple of months. So thank you. We also have an appreciation to all those at Kol Shalom who've contributed to making summer services run smoothly, and it has been a lift. Mary and Rich, thank you very much for that. After the Kiddush, we will have the Q&A here at 12:30. Then that will also be on Zoom, recorded along with this service and the service from last night. Okay. We have a Counter Blessings donation in appreciation of Howard Weiss for his Menschlicht by Janet and Michael Goldman. And this coming Friday, we have a Shabbat live and congregational dinner. I'll be very happy to see Sally. So that will be this Friday from 6:30 to 7:30. If you haven't already, please go online for your high holiday tickets. And if you are going to be staying the night at the hotel, all of the deadlines for this and setting up babysitting services, whatever you need, is September 9th. So that's this coming Friday. If you are having trouble finding any of the forms or accessing the forms online, please contact Samantha. As we do every year, we'll be supporting Manna during the high holidays. So we are collecting non-perishable canned foods. So there will be, as we do every year, a truck at the Hilton parking lot on Kol Nidre services on October 4th from 6 to 7 before services. On September 18th, Shofar on the Roof, Daron and Shar Friedberg. So you can also pick up Machzorim. Cheryl Hepfer and Phyllis Gluck will have some nice treats that they make. Sally will be singing, hopefully with the students from Neshama. And please RSVP to Samantha. There's also an opportunity to order from the Char Bar. Okay. And there'll be a book discussion October 2nd, 10 to 11:15 on Zoom. The book is Cast, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. And lastly, we have school registration going on, which is going very well. We had Rabbi Kovel here last night, and that's all running along very well. So I just wanted to report on that. And their first day of school is on September 11th. There will be anybody who's interested in doing some apple picking that afternoon, please let us know. Or if you have know of any children who would want to join for that, please let us know. That is all that I have. Thank you so much, Rabbi Rosin. And I'll see you at the Kiddush. I have the, yep.
Great.
Oh, if you'd like to do it. Okay.
V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et
ha-Shabbat לדורותם ברית
ha'olam. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat לדורותם ברית olam. Beni uvein b'nei Yisrael, oti leolam, oti leolam, oti leolam. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat, לדורותם ברית olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat לדורותם ברית olam. Uvayom hashvi'i shavat vayinafash, shavat vayinafash, shavat vayinafash. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat לדורותם ברית olam. Al Kain Barak Adonai et Yom HaShabbat Vayakadeshehu Savri Haverai Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Olam Borei Peri Hagafen.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom.
Adon Olam.
On page 211, Adon Olam. Do we have a favorite Adon Olam melody?
Pardon?
Is there a favorite Adon Olam melody?
Whatever you'd like.
Okay.
Adon Olam Asher Mahala B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra Leit Nasa B'hefso Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Azai Melech Shemo Nikra Ve'acharei Kiklot HaKol Levado Yimloch Nora Vehu Haya Vehu Hove Vehu Yehiyeh B'tifara Vehu Yehiyeh B'tifara Vehu Echad Ve'en Sheni Leham Shilo Lehakbira Beli Reshit Beli Taglit Velo Haoz Vehamisra Velo Haoz Vehamisra Vehu Eli Vechai Goali Vetzor Hevli Beitzara Vehu Nisi Humanosli Menat Kosi Beyom Ekra Menat Kosi Beyom Ekra Bihado Afchid Ruchi Behet Ishan Vehaira Ve'im Ruchi Geviati Adonai li Velo Hira Adonai li velo ira.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Still getting my cue.
That's cool.
Shabbat shalom.
You've done this before, I can tell.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
See everyone on Zoom back at 12:30.
Okay.
Okay, same link?
Be here.
That was great.
Sure, yeah, that's great.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Wherever you want me.
Please, center
Okay.
stage.
Okay.
Please. It's like we want to start on time. Let's be respectful. Yeah. And other people are leaving. So I'm going to introduce you.
Great.
And then I'm probably going to start off with so we have now. We want to get through all the motions because we don't want to do this. And you're a Jewish German. Oh, you're right. You're like,
Yeah.
definitely ask about that. And then other, frontline partners with the Jewish German.
Right.
Can't tell you. So that when we first came up with the question, I was like, binge watch. Do you have any questions or anything?
No, I didn't get really around to too much. Because I see a few of your family members say hello, so I apologize for my
Yeah, well, it's
hopefully
next
tomorrow.
Sunday too, yeah. We should have a bell. Okay.
I guess if you're comfortable.
Yeah, I'm comfortable.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed lunch. We should start with the nigun. Too, and we really want to be very mindful of folks that are on Zoom and schedules for the holidays and whatnot. So thank you very much for being able to join this Q&A and get to know Rabbi Rosin a little bit better. I'm going to start with an introduction. I am honored to introduce Rabbi Eric Rosin. Most recently, he was the head of Synagogue Neve Shalom in Metuchen, New Jersey. He grew up in Michigan, where he was an active member of the Jewish community from his teen years through his college years at Yale, where he majored in Judaic studies. He remained active in the Jewish communities in DC and Los Angeles in the years after college. And in 1994, he graduated from USC, University of Southern California Law School, with a JD and a master's degree in communications management. He practiced law in Los Angeles for about 4 years, but ultimately decided his real calling was to be a rabbi. He studied at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies in Los Angeles, where he received his ordination. After ordination, Rabbi Rosin served for about 2 years as the assistant rabbi of Temple Beth El in Richmond, Virginia, the neighborhood. In the fall of 2004, Rabbi Rosin assumed the pulpit at Kesher Israel congregation in Westchester, Pennsylvania, where he served as a spiritual leader. As I noted earlier, he was appointed rabbi at Neve Shalom?
Neve Shalom.
Neve Shalom, where he served from 2015 until earlier this year, when he decided to make a change. We hope someday to meet Rabbi Rosin's wife, Jen, and his 6-year-old son, Sam. You'll learn a lot more about him during the Q&A, but one of the things that defines him as a rabbi is his dedication to getting to know every member of the community, the community that he serves. He isn't just a pulpit rabbi, he's a kiddish and schmoozer rabbi as well. Hopefully you've experienced some of that. He loves working with every demographic and interest group and helping to craft a sacred community that serves everyone. His ongoing involvement with the Rabbinical Assembly and Institute for Jewish Spirituality energizes him and fosters his discovery of new insights, practices, and music. You will learn that Rabbi Rosin is a community builder. Wherever he's gone, he's built communities committed to thoughtful and joyful Jewish lives. He continues to seek spiritual growth for himself and the congregations that he serves. And with that, I will turn to the questions from the congregation. They fall into several categories, so I'm going to read the categories, although it sounds like a game show, but it's not. Okay, so
I don't get to pick categories?
I knew you have to do it in the form of a question. Exactly. For 2 bottles of Manischewitz. Okay, so, all right, so his background, conservative Judaism, COVID, interim, interview questions, Kol Shalom as an interim rabbi, personal legacy, rabbi, and rabbi other. Okay. So, I think that we will start with a little bit about your journey to become a rabbi, and what are you most passionate about as a rabbi?
So as you said, I think what really drives me is the relationships that happen in the context of learning Jewishly and building community Jewishly and studying Jewishly. My story is pretty much what you read, that since high school I've been very involved. I was a Judaic Studies major in college. I think I was listening to Anne Lamott, who wrote a book called Bird by Bird about writing, and she said she tells her students when they say, is there anything else we should think of other than writing? And she says, if there's anything you can do other than writing, you should do it. So I was thinking about becoming a rabbi, and I decided, I'm going to be a committed layperson. I went to law school, and I worked for firms for a little while in CBS. And then it just became clear to me, I couldn't stop. I had to be a rabbi. And so that's when I went back to school. And it's really been a wonderful experience since then of showing up. And this morning was really a terrific example of feeling like there's nowhere else I'd rather be and nothing else I'd rather be doing than to be in a group of people who are thoughtfully really engaging in building a Jewish community. That's where my energy is from, mornings like this.
Great. So I'm interested in learning how interim rabbiing works. I understand you took a course on the interim rabbi role, which you spoke about. What interested you about that role, and what did you learn? How do you define your mission at Kol Shalom?
So the phrase that everyone likes about becoming an interim rabbi is that you come pre-fired. And the truth is, that's really liberating. Because what it means is, the role of the interim rabbi is to be as helpful as he or she can over the course of a fairly defined period of time. So the synagogue has certain goals of finding new rabbi, of thinking about how to think about the future, of identifying what the needs are. And the interim rabbi's role is to be as helpful as he or she can in helping the synagogue figure out how to do that, because the period of time is so short that if the rabbi comes in and tries to do it him or herself, then there's just another crisis at the end of that year. So that the enterprise is to help the synagogue as much as possible. And I say that, but there are really 2 versions of what an interim rabbi can be. It's always a bridge through a transition time. The basic level is to show up and help run services and to officiate at life cycle events. I love doing that, but what makes the interim rabbi role more interesting is that larger role of consultant and view from partly inside and partly outside, and the person to express what I'm seeing and ask questions to see how I can be most helpful. And the thing that I learned during this training, or one of them, is that it's the congregation who chooses which model of interim rabbi you want. And part of what's so interesting about this community is that it's already so thoughtful that I walk in with some assurance that you're really looking to work together, not just to keep the wheels moving. You're really looking to think together.
Great. Okay. On that, what do you think will be the biggest problem for you to address here at Kol Shalom?
So I will answer in good rabbinic fashion, or actually in law student fashion. I'll fight the hypothetical.
Okay.
And I'll say there are obviously going to be a few problems. And one is it's a very limited time. And so the first challenge is to get to know everything and everyone and the situation and the challenges that the congregation thinks are important. And that being said, what's already been expressed to me is there are demographic challenges. And part of the wonderful character of this congregation is how much everyone is enmeshed and how much everyone is dedicated. And the shadow side of that is it's sometimes hard for people from the outside to break into such a warm and close community. And so to really think about how do you expand what's happening here and let more people in and invite more people in and help, once they get in, give them that on-ramp so that they really can make it into the center. So that demographic challenge has been expressed to me several times since I got here. And then just to, again, keep everyone open to all of the wonderful things that are here, all the tools that you already have, and to figure out how to use them in the best possible way for the best and most creative answers to those things that come up. So the demographics, I know that you have a strategic plan starting, and I know there'll be a rabbi search. That should be enough to keep me out of trouble.
Can everybody hear me? I understand. Is that better? Okay. What is it about us that resonated with you and prompted you to apply for this position in the RA site?
There are a number of things, but I think maybe the first answer is how thoughtfully the questionnaire was written. I went through the search process when I decided to leave my last congregation, and I did receive an offer from another synagogue, and I didn't end up going there because it did not feel to me like they wanted to do the kind of work that's going to be necessary to move from this post-COVID to the next stage of what a synagogue is going to look like. I read the questionnaire, and it just read as very thoughtful. It read as intelligent. It read as a group of people who are really thinking, yeah, we can think about how we want to use the liturgy, whether or not there are things that need to be changed. We can think about how our school should look, and we're not going to just do what we've been doing. And so the opportunity to work with a thoughtful place is what was most exciting.
Great. Okay, so this is going to be an interview question.
Okay.
In the interview category. Why did you leave your last shul?
So I left my last shul for similar reasons. It came time to negotiate a new contract, and before we started talking about the contract, I sat down with the committee and I said, I think this is where we need to go. These are the kinds of changes that we need to make to step into this next period of our history. And the response I got was less than enthusiastic, that their vision after this COVID time was to step back to the way things were, which hadn't been working perfectly then. And my vision was, no, we really need to think reflectively about what's demanded now. And it just became clear to me that the discrepancy was broad enough that we would both be very frustrated if I had stayed.
Okay, thank you. Another interview question. You'll be commuting from New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us a little bit about sort of how you foresee that going and supporting us?
So some of those things, some of those details are things that we'll continue to discuss, I have no doubt, but my assumption is that an interim rabbi really needs to be here, that I would have an apartment, hopefully within walking distance, and that for most of the week and certainly every Shabbat and life cycle and holiday, I would be here, and that hopefully I would have a day off as well. And hopefully that would be Monday, and so at least, at the very least, my wife also likes going to services, and so hopefully we'd spend a lot of Shabbatot together here. And that Sunday after religious school, for weeks when religious school met, I'd go back up with them and spend Monday up there. And I haven't had the discussion yet whether or not there might be a day a week when I can work from home. But the thought is to be here and present in a way that I need to be. I think we have learned that Zoom allows us to do some things from a greater distance. But for the most part, I want to be here when the kids show up for religious school. I want to be here on Shabbat. I want to be here for meetings. And I think I couldn't do this job without doing that, I don't think.
I'm going to ask a little bit of a question that isn't in the present, but if everything moves forward, would you be interested in joining us for High Holidays?
If things move forward, and I hope they will, I think it would be important for me to be here for the High Holidays in some capacity, because I think the first task of an interim is to get to know the community, and to miss that opportunity when the community really comes together would be a big opportunity to miss. I've spoken to Rabbi Maltzman, and I know that he will be officiating during the holidays, but he also indicated some interest in figuring out if there's a way to kind of work together or make a space. But I think that it would be important for me to be part of the community, to be here during that time when the community comes together.
So one of my questions was going to be, what are the first 3 things you would do as our rabbi to get to know our congregation?
Yeah.
I think you answered some of them, but...
Right, so some of them are the things that will happen naturally. I'm sure I will get to know the Shabbat regulars in a very natural way. I hope that I'll get to know the religious school families by being present. I hope that I'll get to know the committee members in different committees by attending those committees. And I also think we probably need to deliberately build some opportunities, some informal get-togethers, so that we can. This is a lovely community, but it's a size where that's very conceivable, that we could put together informal discussions where I could get to know people and hear what's happening, hear what concerns are, and hear how I can help.
This is under the personal category.
Uh-oh.
No, it's all fine. You recently went on vacation. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and what you like to do on your off time?
So the vacation was wonderful. It was to my happy place. It was to Charlevoix, Michigan, where my parents have a little condominium looking over the channel between Lake Michigan and Lake Charlevoix. And this is not going to be a popular thought out here, I know. It's just a lot less crowded than like the Jersey Shore or the Delaware Shore. And I grew up going up there. So it was my wife and my son and I all went, which was lucky because if my son hadn't gone, we wouldn't have been allowed in. But it was terrific.
Great. Wonderful.
And in terms of other off time, as a most of the time pulpit rabbi and the father of a 6-year-old, and my wife also works. Not a lot of free time. Okay. But I have been, my father gave me an old camera of his. I've been taking a lot of pictures lately. And maybe, our Shabbat and Motzei Shabbat have been the time that we've been able to carve out some time for ourselves.
Great. So this is a 2-part question under the personal category. What book are you currently reading, and what book would you recommend for someone who is interested in Judaism? That's not someone who's going to convert, or just like, your favorite sort of Jewish
Gotcha.
book.
So I'm currently reading a book called Longing, and it's by a colleague, Justin David, who has a congregation in Northampton, but I think his first congregation was Addis in D.C., and here's the embarrassing part of the story. I bought the book a couple of years ago when he first wrote it, because I know him and I like him, and I just picked it up, and it's brilliant. I mean, the use of, he uses text beautifully, and when you're a rabbi, you collect texts like other people collect, baseball cards or something. He uses text beautifully to tell a really personal story, but also a really profound analysis of what spirituality is. So I'm loving that book. And I have to write him and tell him that, even though it's a little bit embarrassing because I first wrote him 2 years ago to tell him that I bought the book. And of books that I would recommend, again, rabbis collect texts and they collect books. We've got lots of books. Someone mentioned yesterday, This Is Real and You're Completely Unprepared by Ellen Liu. I think that's one of the greatest books to prepare for the holidays. I've taught Musar in a number of different contexts, and the book that people resonate most to is a book by Alan Marinus. I think it's called Everyday Holiness. For me, reading the Sabbath was by Rabbi Heschel was very powerful, and also it's short, and I got through it when I was like a teenager. And Soloveitchik's Lonely Man of Faith, all of those are really accessible and really thought-provoking.
Great. What has been a highlight or favorite moment for you as a rabbi?
Oh, that's a great question, too. So I'll talk about maybe two moments. When I was in Westchester, Pennsylvania, at Kesher, Israel, I'd been there for a few years, and one of the members came up to me. He was a really tall Irish Catholic guy who was married to the woman who taught our bar mitzvah kids, and then she came to work in the office, and he said, "You know, Rabbi, I never thought I'd say this as a Catholic man, but you are my rabbi." And it was so great and I thought, I never thought I'd hear anyone Catholic say that to me. But what it meant was that in the way that I took all questions from wherever they came from and tried to give the best answers that I could give, in the way that we tried to include everyone to the extent they want to be included. We had succeeded, and I had succeeded, in saying there's real value to this tradition. No matter on what level you want to affiliate, you're going to find some meaning and something to think about, and we're going to support you and your family. And it felt really good to know that, he also had a priest, but there were questions that he came to me for, especially in dealing with family things. How should he deal when his wife's family had a loss? And that was a good moment to know that my first president at Neve Shalom, he had a motto, and it was, whenever a tough issue came up, it never hurts to be nice. And this was just the proof of that concept of whatever the situation, if you can be as respectful and show up as much as you can, it's probably going to turn out okay. So that was a great moment. And then there are just all of the moments in Jewish life. The service this morning, you look out and you really see people davening and weddings and b'nai mitzvah and watching, I'll say, a young woman who your first bar mitzvah meeting says, "I'm not very smart," get up at her bat mitzvah and say, "And I thought of this when I looked at the Torah portion," and know that you coached them through the whole process. Those are the great moments.
Great. What challenges have you faced as a shul rabbi, and how did you overcome them? Are there any that now that in hindsight you would have approached differently?
So once again, I'm going to fight the hypothetical for a minute. And I'll say maybe the biggest challenge early in my rabbinate was realizing that you're not going to overcome all of those challenges. And sitting with a family and calling social service agencies and knowing that they're probably going to lose their home. And sitting with families who have loved ones who are very ill and knowing that their loved one is probably not going to survive. And knowing that sometimes you're not there to succeed. Sometimes you're there to be present in difficult situations. And that being said, the other area in which I think I've grown is the whole area of conflict, and that I really have. A psychologist once was I was in a group, and he was talking to us. He said, "How many of you would say you're conflict averse?" And everyone raised their hand and said, "I know that. All rabbis are conflict averse." But it's taken a while to learn that conflict is part of the process. That conflict is actually the moment of opportunity when you can really figure out what's happening, and you can really figure out what does each person want, and how are we gonna be in communication with each other even when we disagree. And it's taken a while, but I'm still conflict averse. But when I feel that resistance, I now know that means it's time to pick up the phone and call. It's time to schedule that meeting. It's time to really have that discussion. And almost always, the resolution is much easier than you're afraid it will be.
Okay. This is under the personal legacy category. When all is said and done, what will people say about your role in the world of Judaism?
So as I was leading my last congregation, one of my favorite notes that I got was from a woman who had been doing our Psalm of the Day class. It was one of our Zoom innovations, was just for half an hour, twice a week, we read through and learned through a psalm in a very specific way. We'd read it through and ask, what do we think the psalmist was intending? And pick out the ideas and the experience and really express those, and then I would bring a couple of other texts to support what I'd seen in it. And what this woman wrote to me is, and I believe she's in her 80s, and she said, Rabbi, I've been going to class with rabbis my whole life, but I've never learned in such a personal way. I've never learned in a way that really asked what I thought. So I hope that some of the legacy will be people who find their own place, their own resonance in these texts, people who might have said, again, like, oh, I'm not so familiar with this, my background's not what I'd like it to be, and realize that their contributions to our learning are just as important as everyone else's, and maybe more important to me, because that's the challenge, to bring them in. So I hope that my legacy will be more people who feel personally engaged and supported, and more communities that are healthier.
Great, thank you. So this is under the personal. Is there something that you and your wife binge watched during the pandemic?
So our television watching together is really Motzei Shabbat. That's it. So we did watch Fauda, and each week my wife would hold my hand and say, this is awful. You're making me watch this. And then the episode would end. She's like, let's watch another one. And we watched Tehran, which was on Apple TV. And just because my wife is still forgiving me for taking her away from the Upper West Side, we watched Only Murders in the Building so she could see all the sights and everything.
Great, thank you. And, should, I'm going to ask that one later. Okay. How has your previous career as a lawyer and other experiences helped you as a rabbi?
That's a great question,
I can see some of it here.
Sorry?
So I can see some of it here with the hypotheticals.
I think that being a lawyer first really did help me to think about how people speak to each other and how people communicate, and what happens when some people don't think they agree but really can be brought into a discussion. I think the answer people want me to give is that it helped me learn Talmud, Gemara. Gemara is a lot harder than law. But I think that had I gone right from undergraduate to rabbinical school, I wouldn't have had an appreciation for people who aren't rabbis and for people who may not be shul goers. And I think that time of working with people in their other businesses, working with people in areas that they're passionate about, really helped me to understand what most people's lives are like.
Great, thank you. So this is a question that I've been getting sort of when we said that we were going to have an interim rabbi come visit. What if we want him as our permanent rabbi?
So it's a great question. And again, part of the value of the interim rabbi is you already fired me if you hire me. And it gives that frame to do that important work. There have been congregations who have had an interim rabbi and they haven't gotten a rabbi whom they like through their search process, and they've asked the interim rabbi to stay. The truth is, I don't anticipate that happening. I think this is an incredibly attractive congregation, and I assume that you're going to get top-notch candidates. But even when that does happen, though, I think that there's a really explicit reset that has to happen to redefine the role, to make it clear that we may know you as a person, but that we're changing what that relationship is. So I don't think it works to come in hoping that I'll be the permanent rabbi, and I don't think it works for the synagogue to come in thinking they can not really do a search. I think for this work to be done, part of that structure is really helpful to know the incentive of the goal of the interim rabbi is just to be as helpful as he or she can. Like, that's it.
What lessons did you learn as a rabbi during COVID?
So again, I'll give a couple of answers. One is that the whole structure of Jewish law, halakha, really is much more useful as a language to use to talk about difficult circumstances than it is to think of as a rigid set of rules. And I say that particularly about Zooming, that I had written a tshuva for my last congregation that we would not be Zooming or streaming or anything else. And once COVID hit, we realized that in this new situation, that imperative to include people who for health reasons couldn't be included overrode all of the previous, and that's still within the halakhic system. So the first was that kind of inside baseball, halakha is more flexible than I thought it was. But the second is a more global idea that we were already in a period of transition, and COVID has accelerated that. The strength of social bonds in synagogues was already fading, and COVID has chipped away even more. More people know that if they wake up late, they can dial into Park Avenue. Or if they really have a question, they can either call the rabbi and make an appointment, or ask Rav Google. All of that is true. But what COVID made clear is we're going to have to be creative. And the creative things that people have done have been great, but we can't stop being creative now because, as we see, we're not done with it, and we probably will be thinking about COVID for a long time, but thinking about the problems that have been accentuated for COVID from here on in. So we have to continue to be creative, and what you're doing with your school is a great example of that. And thinking about different ways to have services and different ways to invite people in, especially physically, but not just physically. COVID taught us we have to keep being creative.
I just want to say, we've been talking and meeting with Rabbi Rosin throughout this process, and I found that he's incredibly humble. But I wanted you to tell us a little bit about your synagogues and your specific role in the response to the shooting in the synagogue in Texas.
To back up a little bit, it's always been very important to me to be an important part of the clergy groups and the interfaith clergy groups and the other civic groups. And so I was always a presence at the mosques during the time when people were not being allowed in from Muslim countries. I was present for the African American community. I had been asked to be on a police commission. And the day we heard about the shooting in Pittsburgh, I got a call from the mayor's office in Metuchen. And we worked and we put together with the clergy and with the political structure of our area, a gathering, and we had 800 people there. And the governor of New Jersey came, and all of the clergy were there, and people spoke beautifully, and it was amazing to see that of those 800 people, at least 500 of them were members of the larger community that were there to support us. Not in any small measure because we had made a point of being there to support them as well. We still look forward and are much more happier to get together and celebrate things. But it was really nice to know that when we were in pain, people wanted to be there and provide us with comfort and support.
Thank you. Yeah, I got that wrong. I meant Pittsburgh, not Texas. Sorry about that. Can you tell us about some social action Tikkun Olam initiatives that you've been involved with over the past several years?
Mm-hmm. So all of the synagogues that I've belonged to have had food drives and other drives, and I think those are important to keep things top of mind for ourselves and our families. As I said before, though, I've always been much more energized by the relationship building. And so when I was in Westchester, we had a very good relationship with a mosque across the street, and our synagogue hosted a 9/11 memorial again with civic leaders and legislators from Pennsylvania and all the different clergy. Where I am now in Metuchen, I worked with a Presbyterian minister, and we brought Ibram Kendi to talk about anti-racism. I've been asked to serve on that police commission to think about how our police force in Metuchen can be more sensitive. And one of my favorite events was an event that I worked with one of the congregants on, and they called it Gesher. And her idea was to build relationships from our community outward. And what she did is, together with a small committee, we invited 4 people who are not born in this country to speak, and then 120 people to sit around tables in the room and very deliberate tables, so you weren't sitting with people you know or people from your own community, and to guide through conversations, so not just to collect things, but to help build those relationships and to help people be able to ask in a safe space, what has it been like for you coming from Pakistan during these last 6 years? Or what has it been like you? What has it been for you? There's a very large Hindu community where I live. You know, and all these discussions about church and state, where does the Hindu community fall in that? And what's it like to be a newcomer in this country, whether it's this generation or a few generations? So those relationships to me have been more powerful and more lasting than some of the individual kinds of drives.
Great. What kinds of adult education classes have you initiated or led?
So I've always done at least one adult education class at any moment during the programming year. I have done Musar classes, I have done classes, sort of intro to Judaism classes, I've done classes with the parents for the religious school. 3 classes I'll highlight though. Over the past couple of years, what I've been doing is ordering curricula from JTS and Hartman and Pardes, where they bring different scholars and we learn text together, and then we get, you know, the benefit of bringing this person who probably wouldn't get to Metuchen very often otherwise. And last year what we did, we spent a lot of the year thinking about Israel, and we used the Hartman curriculum on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The year before that, we used a curriculum from JTS about conflicts within Jewish history, within Jewish thought. And then before that, we used one from Pardes. Over COVID, just to again build spaces for people to be together in, I had classes a couple of times a week. First we did Parshat HaShavua with Hasidic commentaries twice a week. And then when we finished that, and I thought, oh, I gotta think of something else, we moved to Psalms, because out there are 150 of them. That'll last me for a while. And we got together for a half an hour twice a week, but it was really a great space for people to be in and for people to, again, be able to share themselves and make these texts real for themselves. So all that being said, adult ed is such a huge field that I'm sure there's things we can find that will be meaningful and personal for people.
Great. The next couple of questions are about conservative Judaism.
Okay.
How do you view the status of conservative Judaism today, and what will make conservative Judaism thrive in the future?
So there are 2 parts of that question. Do you want the good news or the bad news first? Okay, I'll start with the bad news first. We can go to the good news. The bad news is that conservative Judaism and Reform Judaism are all made on a membership model. And as there aren't as many members in synagogues, the movements don't have as many resources to put towards things. So that's a problem, and that's a challenge. But the good news, I think, is that conservative Judaism really does offer, and I can say this honestly, the most compelling vision of how to live a rich Jewish life in this larger world in which we live. And I spent a lot of my Jewish time outside of the synagogue with rabbis from every movement. I have a Chevruta who's a Reform rabbi in Riverside outside of Los Angeles, and we get together every week by phone. I do Institute for Jewish Spirituality and Hartman when I can. I'm together with Jews of all the different denominations as often as I can be, and we learn together beautifully. But I think conservative Judaism, the benefit is, again, it gives us this language of halakha, it gives us this cherishing of texts, of really thinking through, that gives content and helps us steer our way towards a path of wisdom. And for those reasons, I know that the thought and the center of conservative Judaism is going to last. Like our thinkers, our thought, our innovations, they're going to be powerful. We still have to figure out how to support the movement better.
A a follow-up to that. What does being a conservative Jew mean to you? Which I think you answered, but how does that impact your personal observance?
So something that didn't come out in my bio is I grew up in a Reform household, and some of my favorite parents are still practicing Reform Jews. And again, many of my colleagues and teachers are not conservative Jews. They're Reconstructionists and Reform and even Orthodox, although I have fewer contacts with the Orthodox world. There are a few modern Orthodox rabbis I love to learn with, though. And that being said, the reason that when I decided to become a rabbi, became a conservative rabbi, is that language of practice, the language of saying, I don't just think this is important, I'm going to live my life in a way that shows it's important, is very helpful to me. I think that on one side of the spectrum, Reform, and my experience in Reform is, if you're not thinking about it, it's not as much a presence in your life because the practice is not as rich a part of your Jewish identity. And, I won't speak to the Orthodox experience because I haven't had the Orthodox experience, but I'll just say I enjoy the openness of being able to take in all of the different inputs we have and look at them through a conservative lens. Whereas, when you look at an Orthodox tshuva, an Orthodox legal opinion, one of the big differences is they won't bring in secular science for the ones that I've read. It's all from sources. Conservative says we want to look at the world, the real world, the world we live in, and see how it how it shapes itself in our world of practice, in our world of texts. And again, to go through that idea of what happened during the pandemic and Zoom, the Orthodox world didn't move to Zoom because it didn't fit into that rigid idea of law. And the Reform world didn't need to think about why they would move to Zoom. And the conservative world made me think, you know what? The need of people to participate actually outweighs that idea of whether or not we're coming closer to creating something. And we worked at it to try to fit into a conservative definition of not creating something on Shabbat. And that process was very rich. So it's the practice and the thought of conservative Judaism that I still find so compelling. Maybe a little inside baseball, I apologize.
Great. Are you comfortable with the use of guitar and other instruments at Friday night service? We do that periodically.
Here's another area in which I've grown. Maybe 17 years ago, I was not so comfortable with instrumental music, and I went through this process with the community where I was the rabbi. And we decided to try it. And our Friday night service went from usually 8 to 10 people to between 50 and 150. And for once a month. And of course the good food didn't hurt. But what it showed is when it's done well, it can provide a support for people's prayer that they might not be able to provide themselves if they're not completely comfortable. The synagogue that I stole my wife from when we got married is B'nai Jeshurun in the Upper West Side of New York City. And they're really a model to me of how they use music to enhance the prayer. It doesn't become a concert, it doesn't become an interpretive, rock show, but they use music beautifully just to support the nusach, just to support the... So yes, I'm comfortable with it, especially when it's done well.
And do you have a favorite Jewish holiday or service?
Favorite Jewish holiday or service. So there are no religious school kids here, I can tell you. My trick when they ask that in the religious school classes is always to say whichever is coming up next.
Okay.
But the truth is, I'm hard-pressed to choose one that I like more than the others, and there are times when I can be davening alone in my bedroom and just find that moment. And there are times when I'm sitting in the sanctuary and I'm just swept away with everyone else's prayers. And of course, you can't beat an Elo and just that moment. So I'm hard-pressed to pick one.
Okay. So there's two more questions. We've
Two
gone
more
through a lot of
questions.
questions, by the way. There's 2 pages of questions. Let's see. If selected and everything moves forward, how could we best support you?
So the first answer is probably to, and I am not worried about this, especially after the Shabbat, just to let me in. The first answer is to provide those structures to help me meet people and to let me be that resource. And again, I hope that the structure, that interim structure, makes that a safe request. You know, that it's not a power grab. It's really, I'm here for a year. How can I be the most helpful for this period of time? So what would be most helpful is building those structures together where we can interact in those helpful ways.
And do you have any questions for us?
You know, I think if this should work out, and I hope it does, I'm sure that the first many weeks will be my asking questions. The question that I can only ask in a general way, because I'd want to hear everyone's answer, is what are you looking for the next year? Where would you like to be at the end of the year? And once we have a clear sense of what many of those answers are, I'm not going to say one answer because it is a synagogue, but once we have a clear sense of what many of those answers are, then we can really start building towards it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Julia as the chair. Is there anything that I've forgotten or that we need to? Okay. All right. Is there, I think sometimes you want to tell me something. Okay. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and especially because we know that you were kind of feeling a little under the weather, but really enjoyed today's service and your very thoughtful answers. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you all. It's been really a wonderful Shabbat so far. Thank you.
Okay. Shabbat Shalom. Good.
Thank you.